Hello, hello, and welcome to my Sunday Thought on Sunday. That's 2 weeks in a row. I've done it on time. Be sure if you enjoy these to share it with your friends, since I am trying to increase the number of people that watch this nonsense that I talk about, so that I know that I have friends. Um, I'm reminding you that I have a book. It's called The Last Laugh, and it's about realizing your dreams. And I would love somebody to buy it so I can have a cup of coffee. Um, I need all the caffeine I can get. I've got a second book out. I have a second book out. It's called Outrageously Old and Loving It. It's published by Age Song, and you can find that on Amazon as well. It's about people that made their dreams come true. It also is about you, because as you read it, I tell you what you can do to make your life fuller and richer, which is what I did. But it's spring, and I was trying to think of what I could tell you about spring that I remember from long ago, because many of the things I tell you are stories from long ago. And what I remember is it was in spring that my father tried to teach me to drive. We learned to drive when we're 16, and so that means that I was learning in 1949. In 1949, and when I turned 16, I'm very uncoordinated, and anybody that's watched the things that I do know that I just am terribly uncoordinated. I couldn't even ride a bicycle, so it didn't occur to me that I would ever be able to drive. But at that time in 1949, if you wanted to be with it, and one of the kids, you drove a car. So it was in the spring that my father said to me, "Well, you're old enough to get a license. I'm going to teach you to drive." And I said, "Well, I'm pretty afraid. It looks dangerous to me." And Daddy said, "Well, you're going to learn like that because you're my daughter." And I said, "Well, I couldn't ride a bicycle. I'm not able to swim. I can't even bounce a ball." My father said, "You're my daughter. Driving a car is easy. I'm going to teach you." So he took me outside. He took a book. He took a book with him, and he took me outside to the car. Now, in those days, the cars were very, very big. They were just huge. And those of you who know me know that that's the one thing I am not. I'm very little. And when I was 16, I was even I think I was a little taller than I am now, but I was smaller. I was very little, and I was very afraid. And my father believed that I could drive this car if I understood the theory behind what made it work. And I said, "Yes, Daddy." So he opened up what you call the bonnet of the car, and we call the hood. And he opened it up, and he said, "All right, now this is what's going on inside." But I was so little that I was at the bottom of the car. I was looking at the grate. I couldn't see what he was talking about. And he said, "No, this is the battery." He said, "This is the accelerator. Um, this is this is God knows what else is in there. This is it. This is it." And I'm saying, "Yes, Daddy. Yes, Daddy." And he said, "Okay, so now you know that." And I said, "Yes, Daddy." He said, "All right. Now, we're going to go in the car, and I'm going to teach you to shift gears." Because in those days, when I learned to drive, there was no automatic drive. It came in just after. There might have been, but we didn't have it. So my father took me, and he said, "This is first, this is second, this is third." All right? He said, "That's the ignition." No idea what he's talking about. I said, "All right. Yes, Daddy." He said, "Okay, now start the car." I said, "How do you do that?" He said, "Well, you put the key, here's the key, in the ignition." So I looked around, there was the ignition. You could see that you could put a key in there. I said, "Okay." I put the key in. I said, "It's not starting." He says, "You have to step down on the gas pedal." So I said, "Where's that?" He said, "Well, it's the one on the right. On the left is the clutch. And when you change gears, you put the clutch, you push in the clutch." I said, "Yes, Daddy." He said, "And really be careful en route," he said, "because I am sitting in the death seat." I said, "Yes, Daddy." He said, "All right, now turn on the motor. So I pushed, in those days there was a button. I pushed the button and my motor turned over, thank God. I can't believe it really did, because when I really learned to drive, I had trouble with that all the time. And my father said, okay, now back down the driveway and don't forget to turn sharply because I want you to go forward on the street. I said, yes, Daddy. And I pushed down on the clutch like I was supposed to, and I stepped on the gas pedal, and I zoomed forward and totaled the front of the car and the back wall of the garage. And my father said, why didn't you put it in reverse? I said, I didn't know there was a reverse. He said, well, when you go backwards, you have to go in reverse. I said, Daddy, when I walk and I decide I want to go backwards, I don't put anything in reverse. I just go backwards. So I thought to myself, when I turned on the motor, I thought to the car, go backwards, but didn't. My father said, said my father. And he took the keys, and he left the car, and I went paddling after him, humiliated, just feeling terrible, because I really hurt the car. And threw the keys on my father went in the living room, threw the keys on the coffee table, and he said, she takes after you, Ida. You're going to have to take her to the automobile club. Now, in those days, you didn't learn in school. You learned at the automobile club. You learned on Willys Jeeps. Willys Jeeps were used during World War II, and they were the soldiers used to use them to escape the trenches. And they were four-wheel drives with high windows and low seats, so you could do hand jobs and nobody could look in, because we did anything for our troops. And they had no shocks. So when I was going to learn on these things, I would feel like I was riding a pogo stick. And my mother took me to the automobile club, and she was very angry because she didn't want to give up an afternoon. My mother's afternoons were devoted to the beauty shop and to shopping. Those were the only two things she ever did, and this was disturbing her schedule. So she was very angry. And she took me to the automobile club, and she explained to the man that I needed to sign up for lessons. And he said, all right, I'll get you our best instructor. And out came this man, and he was on crutches, and he had two black eyes, he had no teeth, and his arm was in a sling. And the man said, this is your instructor. And my instructor looked at me and he said, oh my God, I hope you're more coordinated than the last one. Which I wasn't. That poor man. And we got in the car. And because he was very nervous, and this was a dual control car, he was so nervous that he automatically pushed down on the clutch when I was supposed to change gears. So I was able to do very well in driving class because I would feel the clutch going down and know I had to do the next gear, whatever that was. Parallel parking was a problem. I probably ripped up 30 trees, but I finally got and remember, no power steering and no power brakes. But I finally managed to sort of get the car fairly parallel to the curb after the 8 weeks of instruction. And the man went with me for the test. And I took the test, the driving test, with the driving instructor and the man from the license bureau and me on the same car that I learned on, which had dual controls. And my instructor, as I said, was very nervous, and he would push down on the clutch every time I was supposed to do something, which meant that I really just did really well. And he said to me, I'm very proud of you. You're the first student I've had that didn't send me flying through the windshield. He said, you know, I'm sitting in the death seat. And I said, I know, because my father told me he was in the death seat too. And he said, well, you did very well, and I'm very proud of you. And I said, thank you very much. And I went home. And the next day, my mother was all excited because now she didn't have to destroy her day by going shopping. By going grocery shopping, she could shop for clothes, which she loved. She could play mahjong, which is what she did. Or she could go to the beauty shop and get herself tarted up for when my father went out, took her to a movie. And she didn't have to bother with groceries because I could drive now, and that was what I was supposed to do. So she gave me a shopping list, and she said, all right, go to the store. So I said, I really don't feel comfortable driving. My mother said, well, you passed. He gave you an A plus. You can drive. I said, yeah, but I wasn't driving on this car. And my mother said, what's the matter with you? Are you going to let your father know that he paid all that money and you can't drive? I said, I don't think I can. She said, I said to you, Lynn Ruth, go out there and drive that car. Now you have to know my mother. My mother, I was my mother's victim. And when my mother said, you go out there, I did it. Because if I didn't do what my mother said, I would be deprived of everything and anything she could think of. So I said, okay, Mother. She gave me the keys to the car. And she said, now get this grocery list. And I'm reminded of this joke where this woman says to her husband, I want you to get a quart of milk and six, and if they have, and if they have them and an avocado, and if they have them, get six. So I'm not telling this right. She said, I want you to get a quart of milk, and if they have them, get six avocados. Get six. And avocados, if they have them, get six. And he came home with 6 quarts of milk, and he said they had avocados. Okay. I messed that up, but that's very funny. But anyway, so my mother told me to go to the car. So I got in the car, and I managed to figure out how to start the car. And I remember it was a Ford, and those cars were absolutely huge. And I adjusted the seat like they told me to, and I adjusted the rear view mirror. And then I knew about reverse by this time because of the problem that I had. I backed down the driveway, and I hit a tree, veered to the left, and then jammed the thing into first and ran right into another car coming the other way. I got out of the car. I was absolutely terrified. I got out of the car, and I said to the driver, we're insured, which is what my father had taught me that I should say if I ever hit anything. But he said, but of course you never will because you're my daughter. And I did hit something, a car. And I said, we're insured. I gave him my father's name and address, went in the house, threw the car keys on the coffee table, and I said to my mother, do your own shopping. I'm taking the bus. My mother was devastated. She had really hoped to have all that time to herself and have me do all her errands. So she said, well, I really want you to learn to drive. Don't you want to learn to drive so that you can drive to school? I thought, could I really drive to school? And by the way, when I did learn, she never let me. But I thought, yeah, I did. She said, well, then get in there and practice. And I said, I'm afraid. So I went to school, and I was in high school then, and there was this wonderful man, rest his soul, he's not with us anymore. His name was Freddie Oaken. He was the sweetest, kindest human being ever, even at 16. And if you remember when we were young, 16-year-olds are very full of themselves. But Freddie was just lovely. And he said to me, I'll teach you. I told him the story, and I was crying. And he said, oh, Lenny Ruth, he said, I'll teach you to drive. And I loved Freddie. He was adorable. I wanted to date him. I would have loved to give him a big, juicy kiss. So I said, okay. So he came over to my house after school, and we went out every day for 3 months. And he tried to teach me to drive. And it's simply hopeless. I have no spatial sense. If you drive with me, it looks like I'm going to, because I finally did learn, it looks like I'm going to sideswipe all the cars. I have no spatial sense. So Freddie was dealing, but this is the first time, and I just simply couldn't do it. So my mother was about to give up. And then she went to the gas station. Now, it's petrol here. In those days, you didn't pump your own gas. You didn't do that. She went to the petrol station, and the woman, there was a woman that was pumping gas, and she was a very big woman, I realized that this is not woke to discuss the fact that this one was very large, but I would say that she was approximately the same width as she was tall. And she said to my mother, my mother said, she was talking to her, and she said, I've got this daughter, and she's all A's in school. She must have a brain, but she's so stupid she can't learn to drive a car. And the lady said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, I took her to the automobile club. She couldn't. She can drive a Willys Jeep if somebody's sitting beside her, working the controls, but she can't drive. And I need her to do my errands for me." So the lady said, "Yeah, I can teach her to drive." And my mother said, "Two people have tried, and three have tried, and they failed." And she said, I can teach her to drive." So my mother was all excited, and she said, "All right, I'll go home and get her." So she came home, and I was at home reading a book, which, if anybody knows me, that's what I was doing all the time in my house, reading books. And she said, "Get in the car. I found someone to teach you to drive." I said, "I don't want to drive. I want to take the bus. I want to walk. I don't want to drive." And my mother said, I'm getting someone to teach you to drive. That's enough from you, Lynn Ruth." And when my mother said that to me, I got in the car because I was afraid of my mother. I was more afraid of my mother than I was of driving. And we went across the road, across Cherry Street, to this gas station. And my mother said to the woman, she said, "This is Lynn Ruth. Here are the keys to the car." And my mother walked home, which was just across the street. And this woman got in the car with me, and no safety belts, people. There were no safety belts. We got in the car, and I looked at her, and I said, she said, "Put the key in the ignition." I said, "I can do that." She said, "No, I want you to start to drive." I said, "You're sitting in the death seat." She said, "Don't worry about that," she said, "because I can just reach over if you are going to hit something and turn the key off." This did not occur to me that when she turned off the key, the car would not stop right away, it would coast. I didn't understand that. I mean, I'm the one that couldn't ride a bicycle. I had no concept of moving things. So I said, "Really?" She said, "Yes, so you have nothing to worry about. I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you to steer to the left and to the right. I'm going to tell you how to shift. And I'm right here. And if you start to hit something, I'm just going to turn off the key." And it took her a week, and I was driving. And I had no problem because I believed that this angel who was sitting in the death seat of the car was going to be fine. She was going to save me if I was going to hit something. My mother was, of course, elated, and I began to drive, and I drove. And all was well. I never, ever have an accident. I never have had an accident. I don't have to tell you how many accidents I caused, because remember, I have no spatial distance. And I have always said that the COVID has caused, 10,000 deaths? I could meet that if I tried to drive in Britain, because they're doing the wrong side of the road, and I was having a hell of a time just learning how to drive on the right side of the road. But I was doing fine driving cars. And then when I was 48, I was 47, I decided that I wanted to tour the country and be like John Steinbeck. I had read Travels with Charlie, John Steinbeck, and if you want to know what that is, that's John Steinbeck took his poodle, Charlie, and wrote wonderful stories. It's a wonderful book, Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck, about his adventures in Americana. And I had, by that time, a master's degree in journalism, and John Steinbeck was a man. He only had one dog, and I thought, I can do that. And besides, I had 2 dogs and 2 cats. I can do that. So I was living at that time in Oklahoma City, where they kept the stockyards in the center of the city, and if you opened the window, it smelled like cow shit. And I decided, okay, I'm getting out of Oklahoma City. I'm going to trade in my car. It's a Pontiac station wagon for a GMC truck and the fifth wheel trailer, and I'm going to do what John Steinbeck did. Now, fifth wheel trailer, they cart horses in them. It has a narrow part that sits in the bed of a truck. and it sits in the bed of a truck, and and you have to hitch it. Now this is a person that cannot has no spatial sense at all. You have to hitch it. You have to back the thing into a like a hitch, which connects the thing to the truck, and then you drive this trailer wherever you're driving. If you think I had trouble learning to drive a car, you should have seen what happened when I tried to drive this fifth wheel. It took me many, many, many trials, but what I did is I got a generator, and a generator helped me line up the back with the front, and I was able not only to hitch the car, but to fill the gas tank because you had to have an auxiliary gas tank, and I was so little you could crawl underneath. I could crawl underneath and fill the second gas tank. But I was having trouble because I wasn't driving just a car, but I was driving a car with 24 feet of trailer behind me. So I practiced and practiced and practiced, and I remember one day I decided I was going to drive to an RV park, and I was going to park this thing in one of the slots, and I took the two dogs and the two cats with me. And the cats, of course, knew there was going to be trouble. They just curled up in a corner and waited for the disaster to happen. But the dogs didn't, and the dogs were sitting with me up in the front, and we drove, and I managed to get the thing into its parking space. And then when I drove out, I couldn't see anything. And I thought, oh my God, what happened is that the windshield is so, I can't see anything. And of course, the reason was because I had my sunglasses on, and it had become dark, and I didn't realize it and didn't take my sunglasses off. Well, eventually, I learned how to drive the fifth wheel. I was not doing a very good job, and I set off to explore Southwest United States. I talked Reader's Digest into reading what I wrote. The editor's name was Phil. I still remember that. And off I went. And I managed to not hit anything when I went to Natchitoches, Louisiana. But then my next stop was I was on my way. I think, to Galveston, Texas. And I was going through Winnie, Louisiana. And I realized that I was out of gasoline because this truck that I was driving, it drank oil like some people drink milkshakes, and gasoline just as fast. So I had to pull into a petrol station. Pulled into this petrol station, and remember, I can't judge distance. And as I pulled into the petrol station, I hit the gas tanks. I just hit them, and I broke all the brake cables. So I got out of the car, and remember, I was so short that when I drove this fifth wheel, it looked like nobody was driving. The wheel was up there. So I was really little. I got out of the car and shaking, and the little dogs came out with me. The cats, of course, knew that I was in trouble, and they didn't give a damn. The two cats, they just curled up on the sofa, the little place, and waited till life started again. And there was a man leaning against the wall of the shop that was connected with the gas station. And he said to me, y'all are in trouble, aren't you? And I said, yeah. He said, I'm going to help you. Now, I don't believe that this could happen today. I trust, and I've never, my entire life has happened because of the kindness of strangers. Thank you, Neil Simon. Whoever wrote, Tennessee Williams. Thank you, Tennessee Williams. But I trust. And this man said, I'm going to help you. And I said, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to take you to our only RV repair shop in Winnie, Louisiana. And I said, well, I can't leave the dogs. He said, well, I'll take you with you. So he drove. He managed to haul that trailer, get the truck started, and haul that trailer to the repair shop. And the man said, we have to keep it overnight because she broke all the brake cables. And I said, you can't, because this is my home. I live in it. And this lovely man, whose name was Glenn, said to me, then you'll stay with us tonight. And I said, oh, no. I said, I can't. I have special diet problems, and I've got the two dogs and the two cats. And the man said, well, you can't live in the street. You'll come with me. And so I did. He brought his car. He left me there, went and got his car, and came back. And he stopped at Kmart and introduced me to his wife, so I would know he was not going to do anything frightening. This, by the way, never occurred to me. It never occurred to me that he had anything on his mind except taking trouble to help a little lady. I was 48. I would guess he was in his late 20s. And he introduced me to his wife, and she said, we'll be happy to have you. She said, Glenn will stop at the grocery store and get the food that you can eat, and the boys will absolutely love meeting you, and just delighted to meet you. That's Southern hospitality. That's Louisiana. And Glenn took me to a grocery store. He said, what do you eat? And then those days I ate mostly vegetables, and I think I ate chicken. He bought the groceries. I offered to pay, and he wouldn't let me. He took me home, and what I remember most about the house was it was the filthiest house I have ever seen. I've never seen anything so filthy. And he said, all right. He said, I'll get the bedroom ready. And I said, for who's going to sleep in the bedroom? And he said, well, you are. And I said, where are you going to sleep? And he said, well, the children and I will, and my wife will sleep on the floor in the mattress. I said, well, you don't have to do that. I can sleep on the floor. He said, no, you're our guest. And he cooked me dinner. And then, because the dogs were just disgustingly dirty, he said, I'm going to wash the dogs. And he washed the dogs. And I got ready for bed, and I had a beautiful dinner and a beautiful night. And the next morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, he drove me to the RV place. He got me all settled, and I paid the man. And he got me all settled in the RV. And I drove away, and he waved goodbye to me, and he said, love you. And I remember I said to him, how could I thank you? I could never thank you enough. And he said, I just did what needed to be done. And he drove off. And I still, when I think about that, I'm still amazed at that moment. But I want you to think about that. I just did what needed to be done. How many of us do that? How many of us walk down the street and see somebody in trouble and take care of them? How many of us? I was on the tube not too long ago, and you are looking at me, and I do not look 21 because it's been eons since I've seen 21. And this lovely Italian girl, as I got off the tube, held out her arm so I could take it to get off the train. I didn't need it, but she was someone that saw something that needed to be done. So I'm going to say to all of you, remember the man I met in Winnie, Louisiana. He had nothing to gain, and he had a lot to lose. He lost a night of his of quiet because he helped a little lady that was in trouble. He did what needed to be done. Remember, I have a book, Getting the Last Laugh. I have another one, if you're resourceful, Outrageously Old, which I am, and Loving It, Outrageously Old and Loving It, also by Leonard Miller. I want to thank you so much for joining me for my Sunday thought. Hopefully I'll see you next Sunday.